Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Did you hear it? Did you hear the advice of God? The advice that's given to us when we're worried about being killed? Did you hear it? All you have to do when you're worried about being killed is go get a cow and take it with you into the field. Such a simple thing when you think about it. Just a little thing. You have to be from Vermont or Wisconsin, I guess. But you know, it's the little things that really are important things. It's the little things that we tend to overlook, that we tend to forget, that truly can become the important things. That's the story in this morning's gospel lesson, the story of the mustard seed. You know, if you take a mustard seed and you put it in your hand, you can lose it in the fold of your palm. It gets kind of lost in the lifeline. Mine's getting shorter. It's a very small seed. And yet, when you throw it onto the ground and plant it, it begins to become a very large shrub. In this morning's lesson, this morning's gospel translation, it's called a very large shrub. In other translations, it's called the greatest of trees. A mustard seed is not, a mustard tree is really not a tree, and it's not all that great. But the symbol that Jesus is trying to teach us is that out of small things, great things can happen. This particular passage is often referred to when one is trying to explain God's hand in creating the great church, the great Christian church. It's a symbol of the very small seeds that were planted, the 12 disciples. The humble carpenter's kid from Nazareth. Small things. And out of that, just look at what's happened throughout the church. And there's no question that that's a wonderful metaphor. But you know, when you really think about it, metaphors can be taken and interpreted however we like to see them. So we can see that, indeed, as the story of growing the great Christian church, or as one of the sources that I read this particular week said, a symbol of forming the great Roman Catholic Church. He didn't say it in a particularly nice way. And by the way, he threw us Anglicans and Orthodox in it as well, saying, and all the churches that are like that. But to me, that story is a very different kind of story. To me, when we take it and try to interpret it in our own way, we're doing the story a great disservice. You know, the book of Genesis says that God created us in God's image. And some of us interpret that to mean that God has hands and feet and fingers. But others have interpreted it to mean that God put us on earth to reflect his image to the world around us. And sometimes I wonder if we, the institution of the church, have not kind of twisted that around and gotten it backwards. That maybe what we have done is taken our image and crafted God out of it. We tend in the churches to look upon the world as kind of a smorgasbord church. Not just the Christians, but the Muslims and the Jews and the Buddhists and all of the other traditions of understanding the reality of God and her presence in the world around us, we've kind of crafted it in our own image. Think of a smorgasbord table. You know, you walk up to it, and if you want to have the peas and the carrots, you can take them. If you want to have the lutefisk, for those of you who are from Minnesota, you can take that. And you can leave the stuff that you really don't want to have, like the herring or the grapes. You just kind of pick and choose. And you put it on your plate, however you want God to be. What a convenient thing. All those things that I want to do in my life, I can justify by going to that smorgasbord table. But Christianity isn't really like that. God isn't really like that. All of these crazy mechanizations that we have done, this reincarnation of God in our image, it's all wrong. You know, when you really think about it, the core of Christianity is a very small thing. All of the books of the Bible, all of the stories, all of the parables, everything that we do as Christians boils down to one thing. And it's very simple. Love. All we have to do to be children of God is to love. It's a mustard seed. And the more we have, the harder we look, the more we throw it on the ground and spread it around, the more it grows. God's love is the essence of who we are as people of God. It's what those small beginnings were all about. Small things come out of our love for God. And God acts in really strange ways. Did you listen carefully to the rest of that passage from Samuel this morning? The way that God chose the successor to the king? It's really unique, and there are two ways to look at it. The first way to look at it is that all of the various sons of Jesse were paraded by. And you look at it carefully, and you listen to all of those names. And they are really hard to pronounce. So God got to the end, and maybe he's like me and can't remember names, and he got to the very end, and he said, "Is there another?" And they said, "There's one out in the field with the sheep, David." And God said, "I can remember that name." That's, of course, not the way it works. But God does things in unexpected ways. Who would have expected David, the shepherd, the last born, the one out in the field that essentially everybody's kind of forgotten about? Who would have expected God to call David to be the great king that brought together the two kingdoms of Israel? Who would have expected God to incarnate himself in an obscure little village, in an obscure part of the desert, and to have that child born of a 13 or 14-year-old girl whose husband was a carpenter? God doesn't do things the way we expect God to do them. God doesn't act in our image. We stand in her or his image. I think when we get all tied up with all of these things that we call church, we forget that the image we're called to carry is the image of God's love and God's grace, God's blessing, God's peace, God's acceptance. And we get all tied up in the institutional things. Should the priest wear a black shirt? Should she have a skirt? Is that legal? Should we bow at this point or at that point? Should we ring the bell this way or that way? Where's the love in all that? Where's the love in all that? We're called to touch the lives of people around us with God's love and God's grace. And that's all Christianity is about. It's not about what's in it for me. It's not about what can I take from the smorgasbord table. It's about what can I give to the world around us. How can I reflect this love of Christ, this love of God, in a dark world? And it is a dark world. When you think about it too, we gravitate to those who are like us. You know, bald. But we really do. We want to be comfortable. We want to be like everyone else. We want to be accepted. So we go to places where we know we will be. And we're afraid to touch those who are different, who don't speak with a New England accent, people who aren't the same color, the same shape, the same orientation. We forget to love. It's easy to love somebody just like you, or just like me. It's hard to love somebody who's different. And yet that's exactly what Jesus did. That's exactly what God calls us to do and to be. He calls us to be the mustard seed. He calls us to take that love and scatter it in the world around us. Not hand it in little packets to the next door neighbor, but to scatter it abroad. To reflect that love into the lives of others. And to allow that mustard seed of love to grow in them, that they in turn can grow and touch the lives of others. Christianity isn't about me and you. It's about them. It's about being that reality of God. So whether we're the firstborn or the lastborn, whether we are people who want to go to the smorgasbord table and take what we like, we have to remember that God calls us to something different. He didn't call David to be a shepherd. He called David to be a king. David was flawed, but God called him anyway. We are flawed, but God calls us anyway. Take that packet of mustard seeds, go out into the world, and scatter it on the ground. Don't scatter it so that they can become Episcopalians. Don't scatter it even so that they can become Christians. Scatter it so they can become truly children of God. Because we probably all got it wrong anyway. Almighty God, we ask you to touch our lives, to fill our hands as the bearers of your small seeds of love in the world around us. Help us to feel your calling to us, to enable the world to know your love, to be filled with your grace, to be comforted and accepted. Help us to truly